like to share with you today is just a little bit about sort of where we're at in terms of your City Hall's administration. And I want to let folks know that I think we're in early February, if I've got my dates right. And I was thinking about this on the way over. I think today is the official end of transition, had I actually had 60 days to do a transition for the mayor's office. So, normally a mayor has about 60 days, but because of our runoff, we had about 8 business days. Then we had Thanksgiving, and then we had Christmas. And so I think we have made great progress, but we still very much are in transition. And so that's why you see almost every day announcements about new leadership and so forth. But I mention that because the best part of transition and of being your mayor so far has been the new leadership in our police department. Our chief he's very understated in his remarks in our department, but I will tell you APD is in a totally different place than it was a year ago. And that is a credit to the new leadership over there, and I think to a dedication in this notion, which I'll talk about, but that it really is about protecting and serving the community. And our frontline officers were basically doing that from day one, and so it's not at all a commentary on them. But I want to be clear, I wanted to make some changes at APD right away. We did that, and I think we're already in a much better place. And so I'm grateful for our new chief of police for guiding that process. And so thank you again, Chief Geyer. Now, when I was on the campaign trail, I heard, first of all, we had 54 debates. So if you missed any of those, I don't know how you could have missed one. But they're all still online. But throughout that process, there were a lot of comments about Albuquerque, and a place where, of course, I was born and raised, and they weren't good. I think at the end of the day, what I heard loud and clear is that our city, in many ways, is adrift. And we have lots of things to work on, from crime to education to jobs to health and addiction. And it's not always easy to hear that. I think we all are also proud of our city. But I want to start out with articulating that we do have a long ways to go, but we're getting started, and we're going to get there. And in many ways, I think the first and foremost thing we have to do is rediscover that core narrative of why our city is here in the first place. And I think why many of us are here if we think at a very fundamental, basic level. We have a unique combination that we all know that is the reason why our families call this home, whether it's since time immemorial for our Native American communities, for decades or centuries, depending on your own family's history, or maybe you just moved here. There's some sort of combination between that rich cultural heritage and that diversity that we all are a part of just by the fact that we're here, or because of how long we've been here and our own stories in this community. And then that natural beauty, which in many ways attracts so many folks here in some fundamental way. But it's that coming together of those two elements that really is what defines our city. And part of that definition is based on this notion of multiculturalism, or whatever you want to call it. But that respect for those who are different. And I think it's more than respect. It's owning that diversity and actually championing it and saying that is part of our core identity. That's something we have to remember, and you're going to see from our administration, whether it's in marketing our city, or whether it's in staffing our police department, or whether it's in talking about tourism, we are going to make sure that we are owning Albuquerque for who we are, that rich, diverse tapestry and that beautiful natural beauty that's all around us. That's our core identity. We are not here to be Austin or to be Portland. We don't need to be, because our core identity is that strong. But we need to remember that. We need to try and own that in every aspect, I think, in many ways, of city life. Now, part of that, too, is our own personal narrative of how we got here and why we're here today in Albuquerque. And for some of us, it's a faith story. For some of us, it's not. And for me, I know, because there's very few venues where I actually get to talk about faith, but I've had a unique journey, as many of us had. Some of you might know, of course, I'm Catholic. My wife is Jewish, so we have an interfaith marriage, and it is like a weekly struggle based on going to service Friday night or high holy days and all of this. Also, I made it a point on the campaign trail, too, to make sure that we understand that there is not a this notion of triculturalism in Albuquerque, which is also a reflection of faith, is not true. It's a myth, right? We have our Muslim community. I was proud to go to the mosque several times during the campaign trail. Our Jewish community. We have, of course, a rich, diverse Christian community, and everything in between. But I think folks need to remember that we are truly diverse when it comes to our faith as well, and that includes everyone who's here. So I also am just so appreciative of this community for coming together for who you are, despite our different faiths, but also to agree that this is our city, this is one city, even though we have different faith beliefs, even though we might have just moved here, or even though we might have been here since time immemorial. We are one Albuquerque, and this is also going to be a central theme, I hope, for the next 4 years. There are times when we have to come together. It might be city council districts who have to agree that a certain project is more important than a project in their neighborhood. It might be when we're talking about issues like crime that are affecting all of our city. It might be between departments when we've got to say that cultural affairs has got to respect what the Human Rights Office is working on. But at the end of the day, I think what our city has been missing is leadership. We've been long on ideas, and we've been short on decisions and on honoring the fact that we are one community. It's not Bernalillo County and Albuquerque. It's not Los Ranchos and, Sandia Heights. I mean, these are all areas where there's like political boundaries. We know as citizens that doesn't matter. We want a safe city. We want an inclusive city. We want an innovative city. And that has nothing to do with political boundaries. And so that's why I'm committed in some ways to stepping back from arguments where other governments are leading the way. When it comes to dealing with addiction, and it comes to dealing with behavioral health issues, mental health issues, the county is way ahead of the city. And so my job is to actually say, you know what? I'm here to help. I will follow your lead as long as you're leading, in this case for the county. In other areas, like when it comes to law enforcement, we are not going to wait. It's the opposite. We're not going to point fingers. We are beyond blaming other institutions like the courts or the DA or the feds or national trends. Crime in our city is our responsibility, and it's my responsibility as your mayor. And so that is the approach we're going to use going forward. We are one city, and we will solve our problems together. Now, a couple of pieces on crime. I think there are elements that we have to acknowledge in terms of healing. Our city in many ways has been divided. It has been pulled apart. And this is reflected in where we're at with the DOJ reforms and the fact that we have had use of force challenges. We know this, but we also have to sort of acknowledge that and say that we have to do things differently going forward. And that's why when this, we have this monitor, Dr. Ginger, who is in many ways actually in charge of our police department, indirectly through the courts. But I was so grateful when he actually said that there's been a sea change at APD, because that matters for a lot of reasons, and let me explain why. I am committed to cooperating with the DOJ on this consent decree and honoring the issues that they have raised that have in many ways divided our community. But I also want to do something else. We have to stick up for our frontline officers. And it's reconciling those two things is what we have been unable to do for the last 3 years. And so this is what I need your help with going forward. It is possible to do both, to stand by our officers, to give them a use of force policy that respects our communities of color, to give them training that is based on cultural competency, to help understand in every way that we must avoid racial profiling as best that we can. But we also have to say that they have to be able to do their job. They have to keep our kids safe, they have to keep our places of worship safe, and they have to enforce the laws of the state and city of Albuquerque. They can't do that if their hands are tied. And that's why we're going to find a way to have a use of force policy. This is the crux of the matter. This is what almost every other person after 9 months of campaigning would not talk about. We have to come together as a community on a use of force policy. Now the good news is Seattle's got a great plan. And so it works for diverse communities of color, and it works for officers. We're going to come up with our own version of that. We are going to work with the DOJ, and we're going to get past this, and we're also going to empower our officers to do the job they need to do. And the second thing we've got to do is provide backup. Make no mistake about it, no matter where you're at on the challenges that we've faced, the reason why we have 90-minute 911 wait calls is because we don't have enough officers. You can peel it back and blame anything you want, and there are real problems that don't have to do with staffing. I understand that. I understand that poverty is an issue. I understand the interconnectedness when it comes to education, poverty, and addiction, and the challenges that are facing our children and the challenges that many of you work on in your own ministries. But I know that if we were to actually move the needle on every one of those challenges, we still probably couldn't adequately police our city. When I was in high school, that was about 20 years ago, maybe a little longer, we had, I think, almost 1,200 officers. Now, and I tell you, we inflate these numbers in a real way, but when you actually look at officers on the street, officers not on shift, et cetera, we throw around numbers like 840 officers. This is 20 years later. Our city is 30% larger. So I just want to emphasize to folks that this is complex, but this is why we have to come together. We're going to have to address all of these things. We are going to have to attack crime from all sides. That means poverty, it means jobs, it means behavioral health, and it means resolving use of force, and it means more officers. This is the challenge ahead of us in the next 4 years. This is the challenge that I believe we can actually do. We can actually succeed, but it is not going to be easy. And so I just wanted to tell you, I think in hopefully somewhat plain English, what is before us. That road that is long and it's bumpy, but it's a road I can see the end towards. And I see our leadership team in place to get there. And I see all of you hopefully willing to join us in that process. Now, I want to mention a little bit about the education piece of this, because I think this is another important piece. You know, I remember mayors, you always think of mayors before. You know, the first person I ever voted for was Marty Chavez. Marty won. And those of you who are Star Wars fans, you know, Marty Chavez's terms are like the trilogy. There's Marty 1, 2, and 3. And we all have our critique of like each one of those, and they may or may not fit together and so forth. And then there was Baca, Jim Baca. I actually met with him this morning. And then of course we had R.J. Berry, who made a lot of progress on these issues. And each of them did in their own way. But I mention education because I have a little bit different approach than I think all of them who came before. And the approach looks like this. You know, sometimes mayors tried to take over APS. They were like, we're sick and tired of it. We're going to take it over. That didn't work. Some mayors tried to essentially work with the APS to try and supplement what they're doing inside the classroom and really tried to kind of use that as a way to improve curriculum and things like this. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that hasn't really had a lot of impact either. And I think throughout this, we've also seen this notion of accountability. Why can't we hold our schools accountable? They're not getting the results for our kids. And we hear this kind of almost angry rhetoric about how things haven't changed. Let me tell you, that also gets nowhere. And this is why we are where we're at today. So we're proposing something a little different. I'm not going to complain about APS anymore. I'm not going to critique them. I'm not going to hold them in judgment of what I or what anyone else thinks our teachers should do in the classroom or what our principals should do in the schools. Now, as a person and a former state auditor and a state legislator, I got tons of opinions. But as your mayor, I want to do something that is helpful in its own right, that doesn't require anyone else to sort of agree with or disagree with or put money in the game. I want to act on our own in a meaningful way to help our kids. And I think there's only one way to do that. It's the gap in our kids' lives when they're not in school. It's after school and it's over the summer. We know that there is one truth in American education, and it's that our kids lose a lot of what they learn, and we lose sort of competitiveness over time because we're off during the summer and because our school day is shorter than everyone else's. Now, fixing that for an education system is a whole different challenge that requires all sorts of stakeholders and coming together, et cetera, and I'm happy to be a part of that. But what can we do in the next 6 months? we can actually provide as many after-school and summer extracurricular learning programs for our kids that we can. That is a way we can step up and help right away. Thank you. So I think it's a simple idea, but it's simple, I think, in its approach. It literally is about adding one more kid. Right now, we're going to have to study this, we're going to have to put the plan together, and then we're going to have to actually do it. So it's going to take a couple of years, but I can tell you right now, it seems like basically 20% of our kids have something meaningful to do after school, and something like 10% of our kids have either meaningful employment or supplementary programs over the summer. Every single kid that we can help after school and over the summer, we will pull them out of all of these other issues that they're facing. Whether it's that gateway into drugs and addiction, whether it's a gateway because they're not getting help with mental health or learning challenges and they're slipping behind. These are the areas where we've got to supplement, whether it's sports, science, math. We'll have a full sort of portfolio of things that we can do for our kids. And the good news is, we're already doing this for 20% of our kids. We've just got to scale it. And that's also where I need your help in this room. Many of you already do this through either associated organizations like the JCC, or whether it's through your own church. A lot of us already dabble in this area. What's been missing is a coordinated approach from a child's perspective. So hopefully, let's say 2-3 years, we are going to be able to even look like on our cell phone app, type in your zip code. And summer, after school, whatever, and you will see the dozens of programs available for your child. Some of the programs might be offered through churches. Some might be offered through nonprofits. Some might be city parks and rec. This is what we are going to try and do in City Hall for the next 4 years. So I think if we can actually work on that, untying that knot and addressing each one of those issues with respect to public safety and healing in our community, and also if we can finally step up for our kids in a meaningful way to their individual life, to that every day after school or over the summer. If we can do those two things, and a little bit on economic development, which we'll talk about later, I think we actually can be a city that we believe in. A city that actually is on par with Denver and Phoenix and Austin, but a city that owns its own identity, and a city that is known for being a place where there's actually a whole other educational model where folks have essentially year-round learning opportunities if they want them. And a place where a community demonstrated what it means to come together and actually support law enforcement and also make sure that we're doing it from the ground up, from the community up. If we actually can become that city, we are the amazing Albuquerque I know we can be. But we cannot do it alone. I am going to need your help. And so you're going to see over the next year all sorts of different ways in which we'll be reaching out to literally do this together. That is the only way we can do it. And so with that, let me say thank you. I think we've got time for a few questions, but I'm going to cut it short so we can have that dialogue a little bit. But if we do this together, we can be an Albuquerque that we are very, very proud of. An Albuquerque that is an amazing place to live and to worship and to play. Thank you so much. So I don't think we're kind of emceeing, or are we, Deacon? Oh, here we go, okay. Oh, Alan's got him, okay, I was gonna say.
I'm gonna take him to the office and ask
So I'm happy to take a few questions, so we'll see kind of what comes out of the hat. While they're doing that, if you don't know Mr. Alan Armillo, he's our Director of Constituent Services, and we are gonna kind of figure out how to communicate best with our faith communities. That is on the to-do list, by the way. We just don't have the answer yet. So Alan and I are gonna work on it, and so we're gonna make sure too that we can have a regular dialogue. But I'm just being straightforward, straight up with you. We haven't fixed that issue yet, so we're working on that. So he's an important person to talk to after, and here are a few questions. So,
Yes. We got some more.
okay, nice. Okay, that's a good one. All right, let's start with this one. So the question is around what we're going to do, and I don't know if you guys pre-picked these or not, but this was the one thing I forgot to talk about, so this is perfect. How are we going to support our defense against hatred and how people are degraded and anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim rhetoric, etc.? This is a very, very important question. And folks, I want to first say that I owe Albuquerque for giving me the chance to tell you what I'm going to tell you, even though most of our town disagrees with it. I ran on an explicitly pro-immigrant platform. I am explicitly against what our president is trying to do to our communities of color and to the rhetoric that he portrays. Now, that is not out of disrespect for the office. I respect the office of the president, but I also respect America and the Constitution. And I know that we've all got a right to agree and disagree, and on this issue, I do disagree. And so I am committed, and I have been from day one, on protecting our immigrant communities and on making sure that Albuquerque is a safe and inclusive community, no matter what your history is. And I also think it's a good way to remind us about where I started. This is our history. We know this, whether it's our own immigrant background. I'm not going to tell you the story about the potato famine and the Irish boats and all this, but we know that we're all here in many ways because of that story. And the definition of what is legal, what is not, I believe as a mayor, is not my job. I am not here to stand in judgment of how somebody got here. I am here to represent this city. That is the oath I took. It said nothing about people's certificate of status. It said nothing about where people are from or whether they're a refugee or they're an immigrant or what their faith is. I am here to be the mayor of Albuquerque, one Albuquerque, and that includes everyone, regardless of their status. And that's what I will continue to stand for. Okay, we're going to have an announcement later, too, about creating an Office of Equity and Inclusion, which is going to be in charge of working all of this out. So stay tuned for that, and we look forward to engaging our communities of color, especially in how exactly we can be most helpful in that mission. So, second question is, okay, what are we going to do to reduce crime in our city? I talked about most of that. And so the only thing I'm going to add to that is it is about all, I said attack crime from all sides. It is about that part. But I do want to mention one thing. The chief mentioned it, I mentioned it, community policing. The theory is that actually your neighborhood is the core element of policing. And the officers, their sort of resource allocation, their beats, et cetera, should somehow connect to that. And so that you actually get to know, in many ways, the officers who are assigned to your area and so forth. We've done that in the past. Actually, our Deputy Chief Medina is the one who set that up in Albuquerque with others in the first place. So we're going to try and get back to that at APD. And the good news is we're kind of halfway there. So we've made some progress there. We've got to make it real. But that also includes working with the faith communities. And so we are going to try and figure out a way. He's not here today, but there's a gentleman named Chris Sylvan. And I hired him, and we created that job in many ways with the DOJ, because it is going to be his job to figure out how to do this on a neighborhood basis and on a community basis, and that includes our faith-based communities. So a name to remember, a name that'll be reaching out, Chris Sylvan. And then the last question that I'll talk about, because I have to answer this one, do I really like the taquitos at St. Pius when I was there? I think I know who asked this one, because I ran into him once before. They were the best. And I used to go back as an alumni and still have those same taquitos. But I know they stopped making them. I still miss them. They are the best. So.